What are they doing that's old school?
Definitely their TV, which is good. I mean, like it's just like classic television, but now a lot of the vendors blend that with OTT and stuff, so you get a little bit of both. They also just, traditional billboard verbiage of like, have you been injured? That type of stuff. Call me now, which I mean, it works, and that's why people have done it for 100 years. But it's also figuring out how do we absorb like younger markets and how do we make law, like people understand law. I think one of my biggest kind of drums I always beat is that insurance companies do such an amazing job of convincing you that they're your friend, that you have flow and so and there's what is his name, like anarchy or chaos, or I forget what his name is.
Yeah, the
It's like
guy that's
there's like
always
a
crashing
little,
in.
yeah, havoc or mischief, or I don't know, mayhem's his name.
Man, there you go, man.
Yeah, mayhem. And so they do a good job of doing all of that type of stuff. But basically they don't necessarily you know explain to you that like, oh gosh, this person is, awful for the most part, and they're not actually your friend. And when you look at your like insurance policies and things, like a lot of it's like misnomers. Like you're being told, oh, I need third party coverage. Oh, I don't need that. No, 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 you're technically the third party. Like there's the asset, the car, and then there's the insurance company. You're the third party, but they make you think it's this other ancillary thing, and it's not. Or that, if there's no policy, there's nothing that can happen. Like there's no money. So if somebody who doesn't have insurance hits you and has no coverage because not every state requires it, you're screwed. Like, so you do need to have a policy on yourself just in case those things do happen. And you're not like, you lose an arm, something like that, you're maimed for life. And if there's no policy, or this person doesn't have any assets either, there's no recourse for you really. You have to just figure out. And those are kind of the saddest situations and cases. But yeah, so it's just, interesting how they beat that drum. And so it's educating people that like, yes, your insurance is there to help you, but only to an extent, like just because they offer you $5,000 for this doesn't mean that you shouldn't have more, or you shouldn't, whatever, like they're a business as well. So, but free Luigi. Uh,
You're reminding me of how important it is when you're an in-house marketer, how important it is to understand that industry and who the players are and who the enemy is. I found it really useful in marketing to have an us versus them mentality. When I
Mhm.
was in the medical space, I was working for this company that helped nurse practitioners by helping them get their rotations while they're in school so they graduate on time and do that whole thing. And there's whole Reddits about how much they hate nurse practitioners in being able, because they're able to prescribe, and then it hurts like somebody that's a general practitioner that has an MD, and it lowers their fees. And I mean, they just really horrible stuff that they'll put on there. And I found it really good to go, you know what? We actually have your back in peas. Let's create everything for you and, forget those guys. And you're reminding me how important that is. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, that, and also I think there's also too like the understanding of like, do people like, why do you think everyone knows like what their case is? Like I talk to vendors all day, what's a qualified lead, what's not, and the intake teams, and they're all up, annoyed with like whatever crazy people come through, and they'll be like, oh well, so and so called, and they're always asking for med mal, and that we don't do med mal, and I'm like, why would you assume this person knows what their case is? They're not a lawyer. Like people know about Law and Order SVU. They know maybe a divorce attorney, maybe a probate attorney if like they've had to deal with that. And then possibly have seen that there's like a PI attorney, but they don't necessarily understand that they're all different, or that there's even like hierarchies of within that. Like, I mean, I remember one time I learned that like in order to like try a trucking case, like you need at least like 100K plus in just like research funds. And so that's sometimes why you do want a bigger firm for certain things, because the smaller guys aren't going to have the team to and the resources to basically like help investigate all of that. Like it's built for people just to kind of take the cash and keep it pushing and not actually investigate like what happened. And then there's also these larger issues with like the truck drivers and the pressure that they're put under and like how they have to comply with these regulatory and restrictions, but then they're also incentivized to break them. And there's all these like pieces that go into it. um and it's just like super interesting to really kind of try and unpack how does that all come together, how does that work, how does that create an industry, how does it create all of these ancillary kind of pieces that all have to be moved together and teach someone about a lawyer. And so anyway, all that to say that like people will call in and they're like, hey, I have a med mal case, and they're like, oh, we don't do that, and they hang up. And I'm like, just ask them why they had surgery. Like, oh, I actually was having surgery because a tractor trailer hit me and messed up my back and I slipped a disc. Great, I can help you with that. Can't help you with the medical malpractice, but like that's what people are familiar with. They're familiar with that type of law, and so they're just coming to you with their understanding, and then that's where you can kind of come in and educate them back of like, okay, well, that's not necessarily how this works. But again, at the same time, to your point, there's other issues with even med mal of like, why is that not something that you can like litigate against in certain areas? And but then also, why would you want to and not to? Like there's kind of those various reasons and maneuvers and stuff. So yeah, it's been fun.
How are you guys using what like how are you create what kind of content are you creating to be able to educate everybody so that some of those questions get answered?
Right now, honestly, we've been doing a big audit of our website because I think for such a long time, people were just like SEO vendors and things like that. We're just like, oh, it's a content play. You gotta like refresh, tablet, all this stuff. And then now these websites are so big and bulky that now that the AI and the algorithms are kind of reading them in a different way, it's almost too confusing for it. And it's like, well, what is all of this? And like, what's your percentage of pages that have this on it? And like, just the Google game of how they kind of, always adjust the levers and, reconfigure every quarter. So you have to kind of figure out whatever the new bells and whistles are. And so that's been kind of, the fun and interesting part is just like, where does, what is working, what is not working, what pages have people visited, which ones have they not visited. So looking at like, people's long tail queries, even just like asking random people, like, the first thing people do is like they research their insurance company when they get in an accident. They immediately call that person because they've been conditioned to do that. So how do I take that information and say, hey, yes, but totally call your insurance company, but here's what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. And guess what? Personal injury lawyers are free consultations. They're only going to take a percent if you do have a case. So like there is no obligation, and there is no reason why you really couldn't call someone and just double check and make sure that someone has your back in that scenario. But like I said, these insurance companies have done an amazing job of making them think that you're their friends and that lawyers are these like ambulance chasers and they're doing all this stuff. And I'm sure there's good and bad in every industry, but a lot of people get into this because they do want to help. They do want to have a career and a job that is super, helpful. And I think something that people probably don't realize a lot that like my emails are constantly like as I get leads and people have, they inquire, they call the firm, they do all this stuff. The lawyers are actually responding. Like David and Digger like are on it, calling so and so on this calling like, and I mean it'll be like midnight, like I'm getting like I'll wake up in the morning and I'm asleep and I've seen like 5 leads have come through and they've I called this person and this is what's happening, so and so is going to go over there tomorrow. And so like it's also like this full-time job and you kind of have to care, like full-time meaning like your hours, and you have to really care about people if you really do want to do that, like you want to have to help them and make sure that they're made whole. Because it could happen to any of us, really. You never know.
So you guys are cleaning up the website for SEO?
Yeah, well, yeah, just because the way like indexing works now and the way that some of the LSAs and like other PPC things, you have to have like a certain percentage of terms in order for it to let you like rank certain levels for the words that you're buying. And I actually do think that's a good thing. I think there was an old school way, kind of what I would consider a not so nice tactic where people would buy their competitors' terms and words and stuff. And basically now they're kind of poo-pooing on that, so that way, people with just big budgets can't buy up somebody's like branded name. It's like, oh no, you need to have like at least this many pages that say this. So either you need to invest in the content that is going to talk about your competitor, or you just kind of need to let that die. So
Right. So that'll pull in traffic. How are you guys thinking about where Google's AI is including a lot of the answers right up top before you even get to the ads?
yeah, there's actually I've been kind of researching some of that. Is like it's like you kind of have to figure out how those bots and things are pulling that stuff in, because I'm sure right now it's pulling it based off information, but guess what? They're going to start selling that soon. Come on. They're always selling something. So it is going to be paying for that like answer or that result to like, pop up. Like Google's Gemini, I think is like their one. So like people of course are going to be paying for the questions and answers, but I also think people need to know that like what you're being given, like ChatGPT and like all these other AI tools are not this like all-knowing sphinx that will answer all of your questions. Like it's still only as good as the information it's given. And so it's aggregating Google really quickly for you and then telling you those answers. So like it is flawed. Like if that information it finds is bad, then it will sway its answer. And you have to be, you still have to use your brain and think about it in that way. And I mean, and even in law, we're not really allowed to use those tools a lot of times. I mean, some firms have like strict policies where like you can't even like, have an account, as a lawyer, or like, even for your personal stuff. Like here at the firm, we don't even, it's not even like, it doesn't even work on our browsers. Like you can't even go to it even if you wanted to. Because again, you don't want people putting personal information out there. You don't want any of that, going in that direction ultimately. Because again, it's just aggregating data and you don't know where that's going to go. So yeah.
Is SEO y'all's number one way of or number one traffic?
No, we have like a good amount of mix. We do have a lot of organic. Like I would say that like our branded search and organic do really well. Just because they've been in these like markets for so long. And that's kind of my new task has been, tasked with like looking into these other markets. How do we replicate what works here over into other areas where we maybe don't have as much of a history, essentially. And figuring out what is the secret sauce that works here, that will that translate somewhere else or does it not? Like, and that is also an answer as well. You can't be everything to everyone. And so I think sometimes you do have to like sit and look and be, reflective and thoughtful of like, okay, well, if, helping, puppies and dogs in these communities is really how we built our cases, but this other area over here only has, lizards and birds. Do we keep trying to push puppies and dogs, or do we go to lizards and birds? And you have to kind of, figure out what those are, that will make it kind of work there. And how do you build rapport with those communities and make, people trust you? Because like I said, insurance companies have done a great job of making people not trust lawyers. So, but they're actually the only people who have your back.
I think the smartest marketers in the medical profession are our dentists. You need to come and see us twice a year, no matter what.
Yep.
What
Yep.
are you guys running ads?
Oh yeah, yeah. So we do everything. I mean, we have SEO, we're doing blog posts, we have billboards, we have TV, LSAs, are the big thing everybody loves right now. So that means I'm really focused in on Google reviews and figuring out how to do that authentically and make it easy for the process. We're still doing OTT, we're doing paid social, doing, internal newsletters. We have sponsorship, like, spokespeople, NIL deals and things like that. The guys actually just bought the naming rights for like a venue out here in Alexandria. So that's a new one. So they'll be kind of supporting this, it's like a community, event space that's been there for, years. They do like the Monster Jam. They do, big shows and stuff. I think with Marshall Tucker band's coming to play there in a few weeks and stuff. And so they're helping kind of revitalize that community, and give them, things that bring business and bring, entertainment and fun and, make it like a good place to live, basically. So yeah, we have all kinds of things going on over here. We do giveaways, we're partnering with charities, we're doing cook-offs. That's what I was kind of showing them today as kind of our general overarching plan for that. But then I'm such I don't like to like, let things just, let's just throw it at a wall and check. I like to use data. So I'm looking at analytics and I'm like, okay, do we do this event or do we do this event? Oh, we have a ton of people that like cooking. So let's do a shit like a gumbo cook off. Or we have a bunch of people who like basketball. So when I'm looking at my NLL partnerships, not only am I getting the football, I'm looking at basketball people too. We have people who like really like tech and stuff. So when I'm talking to our team about how do we build out some of our, how do we kind of show ourselves different in the firm? It's, how do we talk about some of the, we're paperless for the most part. We use a lot of interesting things in the courtroom in order to explain crashes and injuries and, the 3D of that. And so how do I kind of show people that we're, an antiquated quote unquote, like, industry, but we're still trying to stay modern and stay on top of it and do it in a different and an interesting way. So,
So with operating on all of those different kinds of channels, so I heard you're focused on LSAs and you're focusing on revamping the website right now. Sounds like maybe
yep.
some technical SEO to reorganize the content.
Hmm.
So this audience is mostly business owners for service-based businesses within the SMB category. Can you
Hmm.
explain a little bit about LSAs, what they are, why they're important, and why y'all are focused on them so much?
Sure, yeah. I'll be honest with you. I hate LSAs personally. But they're essentially local service ads. So what it does is it is kind of, I think with legal, people love to find the new toy and like bells and whistles and like kind of infiltrate on that. And so LSAs was basically the answer to people who have, these huge PPC budgets. They could just buy up best lawyer, Timbuktu or, whatever, and beat you essentially like as a little guy. And so the LSAs were kind of incorporated in order to kind of somewhat circumvent that. So people couldn't just like flood the market with their big budgets. It's, if you want to look up, like, sure, you can still see them in your ranked listing if they're paying for that. But up above it, you're going to kind of see that more Google, the business kind of results. It'll show you like actual people that are local. It'll be your actual like reviews and their telephone number and those types of things. So it helps when you have these huge, conglomerates that are, you know, Morgan and Morgans of the world who basically are in every market in the world, but they're, using other attorneys and things like that to fulfill it. It was a way for like the smaller guy who's maybe just a really great hometown lawyer. Let's just say they do divorce or something. It was their way to basically kind of circumvent the big guys with the big budgets by also using kind of, social proof and, Google reviews and things like that in order to help that person kind of still win over the budget. So.
And what are you all doing to improve your standing in the local search?
Sure. So the one thing I think people need to know about all of those tools and stuff is a lot of like Google's algorithms and the things that they build are built for either retail or like restaurants and stuff. And so one of the things that I've realized with LSAs is you want consistency, meaning like if the algorithm is thinking of it in this, because what happens is if people just paid tons of money for every time I type in, I want to, go to Disney or something, and I want to like look up Frozen. And if I pay for, somebody's legal ad to pop up every single time, then people are going to stop using those platforms. And so Google also has some vested interest in the fact of allowing for some, like popularity and trend and nuance so that it creates like authentic results. And that's where I think LSAs have done well is because it's kind of put that in there. But basically, because it is built for restaurants, it's built for retail, it's thinking about like foot traffic. People go into a store and they're gonna, you can purchase many things many times and leave many reviews. And so it's built for things like that. It's not necessarily built for a law firm who, has an extremely long cycle. It may take years for someone's case to settle. And so it's not always like the easiest thing to get tons of volume of, reviews and things like that. Because you're not dealing with, hundreds of people in a day. You're maybe dealing with hundreds of people in a month, but not in a day, as you would maybe at a restaurant or in a, in a mall or like a store or something. And so how can you still create knowing that that's how the algorithms work and that's how they prioritize, who gets, better ranking. Because at a certain point, everybody's paying $5 for this person to click. So the system then has to start looking at other things in order to let that who's going to figure out who's going to win. And because again, like they're built for retail, they're built for restaurants, it's going to use consistency. It's going to use like frequency of reviews and things like that in order for you to win. And so instead of just, everyone sending out an e-blast to their office and being like, everyone needs to do a review, and you have 15 reviews in a day, it's actually better to say, hey, everybody needs to get 2 a week. you know it's gonna 15 at one time and 2 consistently, like, are kind of the same thing. So you don't want to show all of your cards initially and then you're like, well, crap, who are we going to call to give us a review? It's more like, hey, every week let's find someone to give us a review, or 2, or however. And that's how the system's going to see that it's consistent, it's continually building, it's something that people are still interested in. And so that's when you're looking at legal, or you're looking at medical, and you're looking at things like that. That's what you want, is that consistent, you know, things coming in. You don't want these big, pushes and then fall off, and then push and fall off, because then you're basically just sinking your dollars. It's all about momentum and kind of staying that way.
How how are you guys asking your customer base, your satisfied clients for review? What's that
Yeah.
process look like?
So basically what we've done is we've implemented it, and we've kind of built out like what, client experience, client journey, like what happens at every kind of facet of, when they sign on, what's happening, and the day before their meeting. And some of those things are still being built out and we're helping, like revitalize. But for the most part, like we build in steps within the process. So like once the intake team, has somebody signed up, they send out something that's like, hey, could you leave a review about your experience with intake? Great. You then go to your meeting with your lawyer, you meet them. There's something after you leave that meeting. Tell us about your experience with your lawyer. So we're putting continual pieces throughout the process for people to leave those reviews and stuff. And then obviously at the very end, the best time to ask for a review is when you're handing someone a big check. And so basically kind of saying, all right, how do we then, when people are like, what can I do for you? Thank you so much for helping me. We also say, hey, after you leave today, if you could just leave us a review, that would be really awesome. And so basically kind of building it within our own infrastructure and system so that it is very easy and passive for the clients, but also it's not this like random push from, the paralegals that are like, I need to get a room, and they're like emailing everyone frantically. It's like, no, this is a natural, this person left, it's a part of the process. This makes sense for them to have an opinion and thought on it. And so just kind of building it into the infrastructure has kind of been what's been working for us.
And are you focused on solely Google, or are you doing anything like Yelp or Facebook, anything like that, and asking for reviews?
Right now, just because of the LSAs, we have focused solely on Google for the most part. But there are great tools like Podium, and I can't think, there's another one. But basically, you can have it connect to all of your accounts, and then it can post on all of those places for you very simply. So as long as that person goes in, they use their Google account and also say, hey, I wanted to post on Facebook and on Yelp and on Google. You can kind of one-stop shop it. So we also try to make it super simple for the client to get it everywhere as well. And so then that way they're not necessarily like, okay, well, can you also go to Facebook, and can you also go here, and can you also go there? It's like, no, checkbox, pick every platform you want this to kind of go on. So, it's not a cheap tool, but at the same time, if the trade-off is, pay $5 so that I can save, 5,000 bucks every month on ads, then okay.
Fair enough. What about like the actual content on the Google listing?
Mhm.
Are you rethinking through that, or is it already good the way it is? Like how does that factor into uh
Yeah, that's actually something that we've been currently testing. So after we kind of realized how the Google review stuff was working, now we're kind of looking at, okay, what photos, because now the photos are being read on, those things, and it will pick ones based on like what people, like to look at. Now there's also like, colloquialisms. Like most people don't know the difference between a lawyer and an attorney. And so how do we, and nobody is Googling personal injury except for other personal injury attorneys. I would like for the record to show. It's all everybody Googling each other, but people are looking up car wreck attorney. They're looking up car crash attorney. And I think there's like a lot of value in just asking someone like, hey, if you were going to go about this, what would you do? And so looking at those long tail queries, just asking your friends, asking regular people, like, how would they go about this? I remember one time I was working with an estate planning firm, and I remember I asked my mom, who's a cop, I was like, "Hey, when you hear estate planning, like, what do you think?" And she goes, "Oh, that's for rich people."
Mm.
And I was like, "Good." And
Mm.
then I kind of asked around, and other people were like, "Yeah, that is for rich people." And I'm like, "Actually, it's not." So like I got to educate them. But at the same time, I was like, "Okay, well, what would you probably be doing?" After I kind of told her what it was, she's like, "Oh, I probably would be looking for like how to make a will." So it's also like meeting people where they're at
Yeah.
of, oh, if I'm an estate planning attorney, people aren't Googling estate planning either. No one just wakes up and is like, you know what? I really just want to have someone just go through all of my records, spend a lot of time asking me questions and thinking about my debt. I just really think that's a fun thing to do on a Friday. And I'm going to go call all these estate planning firms. Like, no, they're not, nobody's doing that. Like, it's probably something people don't want to do. But what they're thinking about is, I've had a child and I need a will. Or unfortunately, sometimes people, experience probate because someone didn't have a will and they're like, wow, that process was really annoying and awful. So now I probably do need to put something in plan. And then people think they're getting a will, but actually, in a lot of ways, an estate plan is much better for you because of how it transfers power. You don't have to kind of like go through some of the same rigmarole as a will. There is, something is on death, some of those funds can be released rather than waiting through probate. So, pro tip: even if you have a will, you still may have to deal with probate, which is a long process with your local legislature or your local judiciary things. And so, what that sucks is it freezes up money when people need to be buried because you can leave money for and plan for that, but if nobody can technically like give you those funds until X, Y, and Z thing has happened and you can't get an appointment for 2 weeks, nobody's delaying a funeral that long. And so then people end up having to make other choices and other things and other plans that go out of people's own, preference of, how that happens. And so then after that, you're like, gosh, this was awful. Like, I hate that I had to like, get a loan. So then that way in 2 weeks or in 2 months when these funds are released, now I can pay my mom's like casket off or whoever's, type of thing. So that's how people kind of come to it. So it's like looking at like what is happening in their life that is actually now causing them to have to think about this thing and meeting them where they are with it. Or
What I
even like,
hear you saying is
Mhm.
like one of the biggest things that you're doing as the director of marketing for the firm is like getting down into like, how are they discovering what they need because you want to attract them, but then also how to communicate to them in the way that they speak and think. So
Mhm.
that way there's this meeting of the minds.
Yep,
They
yep,
understand what you offer and then they want to do business because you're speaking the same language.
exactly. And again, you can only lead people to water. So meaning like I'm sitting here looking at my budgets and I'm looking at like what our plans are for stuff and I'm thinking, okay, well, if the top 10 things of our Google Analytics interest and affinity groups and stuff and all of that is saying like people like food, they like this, they like basketball, they like football, they like that, okay, well then that's where I should put my time into. If those are the converting traffic on my site, because that's where the people who just inherently see us and like us, those are what they're interested in. Like I don't know why somebody who likes those things also likes this law firm, but all I can tell you is if there's 100 people and 50 of them are fit that group and need a lawyer, the likelihood of them going with us is much higher. So it's like, okay, well, that's where I'm going to spend my efforts and energy, kind of touting and promoting. And then at the same time, it also needs to be authentic to the firm. Like I think a lot of times people try to be too many things to people or try to like change themselves. And so it'll work for a little bit of time, but then it kind of falls out because it's not authentic. And so that's also been a good part of like, the firm here is like David and Digger care a lot about their community. They grew up here, they're from here, they care about families, they care about children. Like, our office, like, we do like early day, I think it's like early Fridays. Like we almost have a summer Friday every Friday because they're like, hey, listen, like I want you to be able to go and get your stuff done that you need to get done. I want you to go home on a Friday. Like I don't want everybody just spinning around in their chair. Like make sure your stuff's done and then peace out. See you later. I always tell my team, I'm like, you guys could go to the moon after lunch if like your stuff's done. Like I don't need you just to be sitting here. But
Yeah.
like, if we're on track and we're doing what we need to do, then like be whole people. And so that comes through with just the culture of the firm, but also the type of people they are too. Like an organization reached out and they wanted to have like a raffle, and so I just texted them. I was like, "Hey guys, they want to raffle off a hunt. Like, would you guys like be willing to like basically raffle yourselves off like hunting in your own personal like land and time if if somebody wanted to do that?" And they're like, "Well, people would want to go with us." And I'm like, "I think so." Yeah, like I think your local celebrities, they'll be intrigued. And so that's something that they're trying to use their power for good, and like raising money for a good cause and a good organization. But at the same time, they're doing something that they like doing, so they're excited to bring another person and show them and expose them to like, "Oh, this is how we do it, and this is what we like to do, and where we go." And maybe it's something that someone might never have an experience to do. So it's also naturally finding things that are authentic to the firm and the culture, and then letting that kind of show through too. So yeah.
How do you like when you're working with the founders of the firm, the partners, how and you're talking with your team, how do you define authenticity? Like, where's that line between, this isn't right or this fits,
Yep.
to where you're not chasing that shiny object just to see what happens.
Yeah, so I am a big I love to volunteer. I was a member of the Junior League of Atlanta for a long time, and I did community placement for Meals on Wheels. And so what I like to do is I like to tie things to like a centralized purpose or theme. And so with the league, we always did, we had three kind of components. You either had to hit on generational poverty, um, early childhood education, or human sex trafficking. So if your organization helped with one of those things, we could give you our time and our resources. And so I've kind of done the same thing with the firm, as I've gone and I've looked at like our values, our mission, our kind of overarching, vision for the firm, and said, okay, if these organizations do not tie back to these things, then we're not doing it, basically. So like community is a huge proponent for the guys, like family, doing the right thing, being all in, and also like, being honest and honorable. And so if any of those things tie back to that, then I'm like, okay, cool. That's something we can give our time and resources to. But when we're all like, oh, this is a cool idea, this would be fun. And I'm like, okay, guys, but does it tie back to our purpose? Does this make us the best personal injury lawyer law firm in Louisiana? Does this also mean that we are, being ethical? We're standing by each other, we're standing by our clients, and we're standing by our community. Like I'm looking at all of those things, and then that's basically being our true north of what's needed.
As the marketing leader for this firm, when you first came into the company and you did an assessment of,
Mhm.
what their current state was, how did you think about what to do next and what did you choose to do next?
Sure. Usually I just kind of go in and I look at what's working and what's not working, and then also what is the plan for the firm as a whole. So it was like, okay, where do you guys want to be? And then what are we currently doing, and what is currently working with that? And then kind of figuring those pieces out in between. I also like to sit with all the vendors and just be like, listen, I want to grow and I am willing to kick you budget, but like you need to show me what that will be. And I also don't want a yes man. I don't want somebody just being like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, we should totally do that. If it's a crap blog idea, tell us. Like you're the expert, and that's what we're paying you as a vendor to help us with these like rankings or search or website or whatever. So show us what you know and what your plan is. And I think one, it just makes it easy for you to work with your vendors, but it also makes them excited to work with you because they know they can bring you new ideas and new ways of thinking about stuff. But yeah, it's really just kind of getting in, assessing everything, figuring out where the gaps are, and then kind of just researching the market, researching the people, and then also just being a good scientist in the sense of testing one thing at a time. You make a hypothesis, you test it, it doesn't work, you redo again. So I think a lot of times people get excited and they want to try 15 things at once, or they want to turn off 5 things at once. And so it's like, no, you need to do one thing at a time, figure out like, does it create an impact? Does it not? It's slower for sure. But the payoff is that like eventually you will know what's working, what's not working, where funds can be held and where they can't. And also a lot of times you'll also learn where like there is a point of no return where like you can keep throwing cash, but it's not going to yield anything different. And so then you also know like, okay, this is my top end budget on this because I have given it more cash, but they didn't spend it. Or there's only going to be, this many people clicking for this in a month. So like, why would I pay for more of that? Like I like pulled the reports on like the crash data reports of like how many car accidents are in all of these areas. So when the guys and I are building out, the KPIs and the lead goals and stuff like that, and they're like, hey, we want to have, 50 cases of this type every month for this location. And I'm looking at the data and I'm like, they haven't had 50 in a year. So like that's not possible. We need to find a different way to do it because there's not even 50 crashes that happen in that area of that nature. So like we're not gonna be able to do that per month. So what are our other choices? And just being smart about it. I'm obviously very data, very 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 fact finder, and I like to kind of use that in order to inform my decisions. So yeah.
Yeah, it's important to review the data and then respond with marketing. Um, in addition to when you're working with a partner, what I heard you saying is you want consultative expertise, somebody that knows what they're talking about, that is willing to share that expertise. What else is important when you're looking for or working with a partner?
I think obviously like people who are like-minded, like people like to work with people who they like to work with, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, do you also have some type, I like, for me, I'm very much like community philanthropy focused. So like I like to know if other vendors I work with have something like that. Cause like if I'm gonna spend my money, I want to spend it in places where it's something that's supporting my value. Because at a certain point, if everybody can do SEO or everybody can do this thing, how do I also make a decision for myself, much like how Google would, of like, okay, what is it about this company and the people there and how do they operate and how do they work? So like do they culturally match? Like I don't want people sending me emails at like midnight being like, here's your report. Like I don't want that. Please no, please do not just send it in the morning, schedule it to send at another time. But like I'm going to be questioning things if I'm getting emails that late at night because I don't want people doing things like that. Obviously I like when they do it for leads in the firm and that's kind of our culture, but like I said, I don't want, my account rep for my, XYZ ads, like, stressed out sending me those things, like just manage expectations and be like, hey, listen, I didn't get to this today because I was a little slammed. My day went awry. Can I get it to you by this time? So people who can feel open and honest, to communicate, but also have a similar kind of like-mindedness on things. um, and then they'll come to you kind of with good ideas and good kind of thought processes on that. I also like to look around and see like, okay, what are their other people who do work with them? How are they working? Because everybody will tell you they're the best PPC person, they're the best SEO person, blah blah blah. And so I love to get on an incognito window and like search their clients that they're touting and be like, okay, well, where are these guys ranking? If you think they're the best, then why are you number 7 on the list? Like, what's going on there? Like, how do I trust what you're doing kind of thing. So just, being smart about it, researching, checking in, and not just kind of taking things at face value. But also, like I said, having a good kind of hypothesis of like, hey guys, we want to do this. Let's test it. How do we do it? How do we go about it? And then kind of figuring out how they want to solve and tackle the problem.
I heard a few things. One is one of the marketing fundamentals is people like to work with others that they like, know, and trust, right? That's
Mhm.
finding that commonality. And then trust but verify. That was definitely the second thing that I heard going incognito. Um, if you were to start from scratch, you're just beginning, um, what would be the first thing you would invest in for marketing?
Definitely a website. Because that is going to be basically your digital business card for the most part. People can't find you or know about you if you're not available. So there's that. And I'm not saying you need to spend anything fancy. You can always iterate and go on from there. But having a good, consistent website,
What would you say
then
is important for the website? What do you need on that website
oh
for?
sure, yeah. So That's basically, I mean, you obviously want to have like your name on the website, your contact information, all that good stuff. And then I would also say start simple initially, because again, like you want to have content, but at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm people with so much information because that's also going to kind of overwhelm the algorithms of how to like rank you and place you and index you and all that type of stuff. And so it's like having pages with like, your firm's name on it so that your branded search and stuff works. So I would say the fundamentals would be more of just that you have your homepage, general information, what's going on about the firm, what you do. Like, it's almost like your elevator pitch of what do you got to have on there. Then maybe there's an about section, maybe just either just the ethos of of the organization and their, what they think, how they do things. Maybe you have spotlight the owner, the doctor, the nurses, all of that stuff. Maybe it's your team. Then it's looking at, what services do you guys actually offer? So for law, that's actually going to be practice areas and things, but having that stuff listed out. So everything, kind of what your process is for it, how you do it, how you make it unique. And then obviously like a contact page so people can actually, go in, fill out stuff. I think the new trend with websites is to make these very beautiful, long, sleek websites, but those actually are awful for SEO because you really can only some of the way the rules are set up are kind of old school, and I'll get a little technical on this of like what the header is and the subject line and all that stuff. And so when you have this huge page with all of this content, it's really only going to index for whatever that home page information is. And so you do want to have these other pages that have all this there so that way you can kind of circumvent the system in a way. But yeah, start simple. You don't need to have 400 blogs. You don't need to have, like a PR page or community events and stuff. Like all of those things can be added on. But I do think when you're, to that vein though, when you are looking at, okay, where do I start with content? Where do I start with things? FAQs and stuff are great. Like, sit down and ask people, like, what are the questions that you would have when you're coming, making an appointment? What are common things that people are inquiring about? One small thing too is like, as soon as, we live in such a like receipt and tracking kind of world. When people submit a form on your website, it should send them something that says, "Hey, you've done this. Good job. You've submitted the form. Here's your ABC123 number." And it can all be fake. You can give everybody the same number. Just make them feel like they have like some type of, receipt on what they've done. And then I also think it's a great opportunity to then like, okay, great, you've contacted our team. In the meantime, here's what you need to gather. Because then you're distracting them from, making like another appointment with another firm. Because people probably are going to do two or three, just to kind of figure out who calls them back, who does whatever first. So if you can derail them for a few minutes while it gives your team time to go through the contact form and then call, you can kind of, circumvent some of your competitors in that manner and in that way. Um, and then, like I said, just build off of that and figure out what works using, your Google Analytics on your website, making sure the demographics information is all enabled, the interest information is enabled. Tools like Hotjar are great too, because it will show you where do people get hung up on your website? Where do they, where do they spend time? And what are they looking up? I used to always laugh when I would sit with attorneys and they would want, build out their content plan. They're like, we're going to do attorney profiles. And I would be like, let's see. So then I'd go to their website and I would like look up the traffic patterns and what gets stuff. And what I found is usually people who want to talk about themselves always talk about themselves. So what you'll find is somebody's looking for social proof of them. So a lot of people who lead on that attorney profile foot actually have people screaming for client testimonials because they're like, okay, yeah, I know you like you, who else likes you? Or the reverse, sometimes people don't want to talk about themselves and they're like, well, let's just do testimonials. Here's my testimonial. Here's this. Well, I'll get this client. I'll get this, whatever. And I look on their website and everybody's like on their attorney profile page because this person is like this mysterious creature to them and they're trying to learn who they are and understand them. So it's also kind of having that good balance of social proof and a little bit about yourself that you know feel good to share, but also at the same time then looking at your traffic and understanding what is it that my where is just even technically are they getting hung up on stuff, but then also where what are they looking for, what are they searching for initially, what's their behavior pattern, and how can maybe I help them. So then you can simply say, hey, here's the about me page, but if you don't want to hear that, here's my reviews, and it takes them there immediately so they're not having to hunt for it. And then it creates that kind of symbiosis of, oh, that was what I was looking for. Oh, they already knew what I was looking for. So you're kind of creating these little back of brain, like little micro wins for yourself. That's kind of
Making
already
a
making
good
this
point
person
with
like you.
the like bio and reviews. And whenever I'm talking to somebody about marketing, I've often used dating as an analogy.
Hmm.
You show up to the date and all you do is talk about you. You don't get a second date. So when you're creating content, whether it's websites, social, email follow up, hey, we got your meeting confirmation. You need to be thinking about your audience and the value to them, and that's what makes you ultimately appealing to them.
Hmm.
Not talking about yourself. It's doing everything you can to be attractive.
Hmm.
How do you all think about social?
Yeah. That's something that we've kind of been doing a rebrand with, because social is one of those things where like people are like, oh, you gotta make content, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. And I'm like, yeah, if you're an influencer, but like look at your back end of your Facebook and your Instagram insights and like figure out, when is your audience online? What are they looking for? Also, don't be afraid to recycle content. There's nobody going through your page and being like, well, you've already posted this like 2 weeks ago. And if they are, be like, great, would you like to be my social media auditor? Like that's a different kind of conversation you need to have. So like recycling content, like nobody's just scanning it and like keeping this log of what you've had going on. Bifurcating things out with like common questions and sections and albums so people can see stuff. But then social is your place to be a little bit more personable, because it's also how you attract your staff, which is also an extension of the firm too. So like showing the culture, showing who you are. Also, but it's a good balance of internal and external, but also it can't just be this whole thing of just patting yourself on the back all the time. Because again, why would anybody care? Like if they don't know you and they're researching, why do they care that like so and so got $1 million settlement on Tuesday and they got another one on Wednesday? And it's like, okay, well, like let's talk a little bit more about the team or about how this happens, and that we're having fun and we're doing different things to keep people interested, rather than it just being like, okay, if you're in an accident, there's the first five things that you should know. Like nobody's also probably looking that up either, until it already happens. And so it's like, how do you balance this keeping people interested versus also being helpful? Because again, once you handle this person's case, how are you going to keep them coming back and not unfollowing you or unsubscribing from your newsletter? I would say a newsletter is another one too, of like, okay, if you're getting people's information, how do you get them to open it? How do you get them to not like unsubscribe? How do you put things in it that are actually helpful and useful to them long after they're a client of yours or before they ever become one? Like you have to have this balance of making it helpful and interesting and intriguing. So then that way people want to stay engaged.
If when a service business owner, like a law firm,
Mhm.
is looking to bring on someone in-house, what kinds of questions should they be asking? What should they be thinking about?
I think one is understanding someone's kind of marketing ethos, meaning like I root a lot of my decision making in information and in behavior. My one of my marketing focuses was advertising, but also psychology. And because basically I learned through one of my professors that if you understand what someone needs, you can pretty much sell them anything. Now I have my own ethical code for not selling people things that they don't need, but ultimately, if you understand what someone really needs, you can tell them. So it's getting into the mind of your client, understanding ethically what they need, and then providing that back to them. I always joke that like I'm agnostic to tool, to platform, to like if me jumping around in a unicorn costume got you leads, I'd do it. Like I don't care, but I'd also have to see the data that make sure it works. And then you'd maybe, have someone give like a soft audit and pitch of like, what do they think is working about your website? What do they think is, or your, your social like strategy or your marketing strategy as a whole? What do they think they could improve on? And just what is their plan of attack there? Also, what is their relationship with other vendors? Because that is sometimes one of the things you really need is I think a lot of marketers have had to wear a lot of hats. And so we get really bogged down in the details and sometimes perfectionism and trying to control it. But one of the things that I learned, I had a boss who told me this one time, and she was like, Rachel, you're in charge because I trust you to get it done. I don't trust you to physically do it. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to wrap their minds around, is that when you're in a position of leadership, you're actually there because you can get people to execute, not necessarily that you are the one that has to be doing it physically. And I think marketers sometimes get in that conundrum ultimately. So it's also, do you also have vendors you trust? Not to say that you need to rip them all out, but you may get in and you're like, hey, yes, your website guy is great, but we don't really have someone helping with social. And so, like, I'm going to call this person and they can help us kind of get ramped up and get you a brand guide and get everything kind of rolling and going. Or, oh, I need a videographer for this. Okay, I know a great company that can do that. Or want to reach out to community sponsorships, or whatever. Who do you know that we could basically reach out to for those types of things, or graphic design or whatever. You also want someone who's leading your team that also knows how to like use resources, and you may have somebody internally that does all of those things, but sometimes you need help. Maybe there's a super busy month and your graphic designer is bogged down and they need help. And so it's like, how do you go about making sure that nothing drops? It's not to say that they're bad at their job, they're just busy. And so, okay, cool. Well, we have a guy that we can offload these pieces to. You keep doing this stuff that you're working on. We'll get these done. And then that takes something off their plate. So it's more project based, and rather than just this whole like being everything to everyone and having to do it yourself and all of that stuff. It's like, can this person execute and bring things together? Or do they physically need to like control everything and like put their spin on it, and they don't know how to communicate their own processes outward, and teach other people. So
Earlier, you mentioned AI. How do you think about at the firm the role of technology when it comes to awareness, attraction, and conversion in marketing?
yeah, I think AI is interesting. I have my own kind of projects with it, so I think I probably have a different perspective on it. Because I think people don't realize how it's very much created based on what you feed it. And so if you're feeding it a bunch of BS, you're going to get a bunch of BS answers out. And so there has to be this kind of like check and balance. And so, like I said, with the firm, we can't necessarily do a lot of things like that because it's, proprietary information, it's people's personal information. Also, like, with lawyers, like they're paid for their mind and understanding of law and how it's interpreted and different things like that. But I also do think that there is a place for like, how do we expedite some of these pieces that, like, if you're sending out a demand, it kind of has the same stuff in it every time. Like, it's not like rocket science basically. So how do we use it to help us? But where we're really looking at it is we're looking at it for like our chatbots. How do we utilize it to be able to answer like more intentional questions with people, so that way they actually get the answers and the info that they need, and then it gets passed off to our team, so then people aren't waiting and you're not having lines and stuff like that. So how do we give them that much at the same time too? Looking at our own internal, like, like Salesforce and Litify have like these great AI tools where it can also help the team along the way of saying, hey, usually about this point in time, you need to send out this, or you need to do this thing for this person, or based on this person's kind of background and unresponsiveness, we have found that if you have the lawyer call, they will, be able to reach out. So it's also using it for your internal like processes and organization and support, rather than just it being like, oh, my Sphinx, I can ask any question I've ever thought of, and I don't have to use my brain anymore. It's like, no, how do I use it to also help me be better at my job?
Is that
Not just
their
from the lawyer
agent
side.
product with the Salesforce? Is that agent? Is it called agent?
Don't ask me a hard question on that one. It used to be Einstein back in the day, but I think they have rebranded it. And then of course Litify, it gets named something different for the
Right.
legal space. But yeah, it's basically just those, it helps with like, the playbooks and closing and things like that. And we're kind of looking at how that can help build out
How does your team use it?
marketing. I would say marketing doesn't necessarily use it too much. I would say like some of our Canva stuff is where I've seen it used mostly, like with once you put in like your brand guide and stuff, Canva has some really cool functions where it'll like let you flip all the colors on like once you create like a template so you can see like different iterations of it, or it'll give you word suggestions for copy. Like I always tell people, I'm like, just write out the words that you're thinking and then we can tighten it up and we can find something better with that. So sometimes Canva does like a great job of helping kind of utilize those things. I'm also like a big Loom user. Like Loom's a fun tool where it will, you can just kind of quickly record a process, send it to someone. It'll automatically kind of transcribe everything. And then we pair that a lot of times with Tango is another tool where like you just turn it on and you do what you need to do and it starts documenting and screenshotting your process. So then that way, like, if someone's out of town or somebody has to do something and I'm like, hey, can you like update this? Here's how we do it. And I can just shoot that off real fast. And I'm not having to, type out a whole SOP and reinvent the process and the wheel on stuff. It's just a good way for us to kind of like share and cross that over.
What are y'all using for the chatbot?
It's the native one that's inside of, oh, you mean on the website?
Hmm.
We use a company called
Jubo.
Juvo, Juvo, Juvo.
And so you said that you're working on training it. So are you sort of happy with the answers? How do you feel about the current state of the chatbot and where you're trying to get it to?
Yeah, so I actually, this one's kind of a newer one. This is probably one of more of my like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it right now kind of
Yeah,
things.
for sure.
But that's what we've been doing is kind of looking and auditing the process that it goes through of like, okay, so one big thing was you kind of give them like a list of cases, but sometimes people aren't really good at explaining the case the way it needs to be done. So like workers' comp can sometimes be a case we handle, but it's not always a case we handle. And so there's kind of this if this, then that scenarios. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that we did for a while was like, okay, let's just stop, let's take everything and change our verbiage of like what we how we answer. Meaning like instead of saying, oh, we don't do that case, goodbye, we say, okay, great, I've taken this down. I'm gonna hand this off to our team and our so-and-so will be in touch at this point in time, and then letting our lawyers actually go through and like kind of understand. So then after I get that information back, I then go to the our vendor and I say, hey, these are the questions that your team asked. I need to change my script a little bit, like with you guys. Or is there a way for me to say if this then that, kind of like for them, meaning like someone may call a workers' comp case this or this, so these are the other terms they might be able to use. And so what they're then working on is then adding, so right now they actually have like a physical human that will like answer back, but they're beefing that up on their end. And so we're kind of feeding it the information of like, hey, sometimes someone calls it this thing and sometimes they call it this thing. They may say, they're not going to say, I have a personal injury case. They're going to say, I was in a crash. I was in a car accident. I was hit by a semi truck. I was hit by a tractor trailer. Like you need to know the almost the same kind of SEO kind of nuances you also kind of need even in your chat infrastructure so that people even know what is being asked ultimately. So
What is the most useful piece of tech that you use in your tech stack right now?
Google Analytics, as much as I hate it, still love it. Stop
Uh,
messing with it, Google, okay? But yeah, no, just Google Analytics, it tells you so much. It tells you how people got to your page. It tells you what they do when they get there. It tells you information about them. I mean, a myriad, it can be intimidating, but it is a myriad of like information that can help save you time and money. So.
did the firm use another company to set it up, or did they do it themselves?
Our web developer had set it up, so they've always had it on there because they utilize it too. But I mean, I use it for everything. Like that, I mean, UTM's, campaigns, sources like where people and traffic come in from, so we can see like all of our marketing elements, like how they all kind of come together. Because you also want to know what's working and what's not working, and of course, every vendor is going to try and take credit for any lead that you received. So it's good to kind of just know. But also, I will say, taking it with a grain of salt in the sense that, like, when you're looking at, like, oh, people looked up the name of the firm. Okay, but like, people aren't going to always say they saw a TV commercial or a billboard, but like, they somehow learned your name. Like, they
See
didn't get
from
a
the
premonition
last
from
tax.
God that
Yeah.
said, hey, call this company. they clearly learned it somewhere else. So it's also looking at how much do people actually look you up by name versus like, where they live, also where you have or how much TV are we placing there? How many billboards are we placing there? And then obviously you can ask them where they hear about it, but that's not always a reliable source. I mean, I've even seen it before where someone will be like, "Oh, I saw you on TV." That's what they'll list, but I can see that they definitely clicked a Facebook ad. So it's like you kind of also have to understand the behavior that someone goes through when they're making a decision, because sometimes they need all of it. They need the commercial, they need the billboard, they need their friend to tell them, and they also need to be able to click it on Facebook. So
What do y'all use? What's the website built on?
we it's like one of our vendors' proprietary software.
Okay.
Um,
So
but yeah,
the
I would say it's probably a WordPress bones, but they have their own kind of system on top of it.
Is it specifically for lawyers?
Mm-mm. No.
No.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so proprietary website, maybe WordPress, and then traffic. You all have a lot of channels, which is really cool.
Mhm.
And then you're using Salesforce for the CMS. How inside of Salesforce, uh, did I say CMS?
You did say CMS, but
Oh,
it's
thank
CRM.
you.
It's okay. I
Sorry,
know what you meant.
everybody. CMS, that's what you're
CMS for the
focusing
website.
on. CRM is your Salesforce. All right, thank you. Um, so in the CRM, how do you stage leads? Like how do you keep them organized so it's simple but useful?
Sure. So basically, we have fields. We actually have it connected to our website. So obviously, when people like submit a lead form or a chat bot, like it automatically knows those things and it transfers that information over into the system, like they're connected to kind of pull that in. But then we have the intake team ask them as a part of like their intake questionnaire. So they'll get their name, information. Okay, well, how'd you hear about us? People will give you like a quick answer, keep it pushing. But then we'll also go back behind on our marketing team. We have someone who specifically just kind of helps manage all the reports and stuff, just because we have so many offices, so many types of cases coming in. We we just need it basically at a certain point. Um, so basically, they then go back in behind and they kind of compare everything to what is in the system versus what was in Google Analytics versus what was like also reported, and they kind of back into all of that. Um, and then also, for instance, like people may say, "Oh, my friend told me about you," but then I can actually see that they clicked like a PPC ad. So I have kind of two fields for like, client reported and then also like what we can track on our end so we can kind of see both things. Um, so yeah, does that answer your question of how we kind of have it flow in there? And then we pull reporting of like, okay, here's how much we're spending on this thing. Here's how many cases are kind of attributed to it. Then we look at the ROI. I also do just kind of high level numbers too. I usually get in the granular when I'm looking to either beef up spend or expand something. But for high level, I kind of also am of the belief of like sometimes it takes all things in order to get people to convert. And so I'll take my full spend of everything and then all of my leads and kind of divide that. And that gives me my big high level kind of, cost of acquisition numbers. And then I kind of keep track of that based on that of like, okay, well, if intake goes down, why is this happening? Because sometimes your problems aren't necessarily, always you or your website. Sometimes it's like your team or communication. I remember I had a lawyer one time who was really like, me as the marketer was focusing on, oh, I need to beef up my social security arm of the practice, blah, 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 blah. So I'm like running all this stuff, doing all this ads. And I'm like, okay, like this should be working. Like you guys are getting so many leads. Why aren't they converting? Like is somebody cussing them on the phone? Like what is happening? And what come to find out, the lawyer who handled it all was going on maternity leave. So her paralegal just kept referring them out because there was a miscommunication between the owner of the firm and then the lawyer and then the paralegal that
Hmm.
was also doing the intake. They all were not on the same page. Um, and so I was like, okay, yeah, so you're spending all this money and this person's like referring them out because you haven't told them that, yeah, this person's going on maternity leave, but that doesn't stop the flow. Like we'll have a lawyer to help pick it up. So sometimes the misfires aren't even a marketing thing. Sometimes it's like people and structure. So having a good read on your metrics, I think is really helpful when you can kind of see where things move. Also sometimes when people leave, you'll see kind of your conversion go down. And it's like, okay, well, there was something about this person that maybe we should have thought about, or maybe we should review their process and figure out how do we get the rest of the team to do those things too. Are they super personable? Were they, maybe they had a good stronghold in the community. And so, some of those things you can't redo, but it's, also understanding, is this a true marketing issue? Is this a people issue? Is it, what is the real root cause?
You actually brought up something really important here. It's two things actually. One, lead flow. Every campaign needs to have a lead flow. How's it
Hmm.
coming in? Where does it go? Who gets it? What happens to it? Every
Hmm.
single time. And especially when you start ending up with multiple locations and complexity at your
Hmm.
firm size. But even in a one office company, that should still be a conversation across the team,
Yeah.
whoever the stakeholders are. And that
Yep.
doesn't mean it's just marketing or just sales, or because you had an operations issue. And then you're right, with the person leaving, like, does that impact the lead flow? And how do you fill in that gap? That's really
Yep.
good.
Well, even talking, I'll even give you one better to even pull in, like, understanding your client, but also even your team. So like I had a client who was a divorce attorney, and every day, 12 to 1, her office shut down. When do you think most people are probably going to call about getting an appointment with an attorney, a divorce attorney?
On their
Probably on their
lunch.
lunch break.
Yeah.
So if the peak time where people call is also when your team's dipping out, then you're not going to get any cases. Like, so you also need to think about that perspective and like stagger times, or have like a way for, that person to still take their lunch break, but also still take those leads in or something. Like, what is your process for that? And so, and even same thing too, the optics. So like, I also had an employment lawyer who, the main attorney who handled a lot of the sexual harassment cases, was a very like cis older white man. And if you're thinking about a lot of cases where people have sexual harassment, the harasser usually fits that demographic. And so if you have a woman coming into a consultation to talk to this man who probably looks like the person she's upset with, it may not go well. And so sometimes it's a small thing of like having that same intake woman that was on that helped sign them up, also sitting in there and be like, okay, Jim, this is what she said. Now I learned that, this particular lawyer was like the salt of the earth, sweetest human alive, and was like offended when he figured out that's why people weren't, like, he wanted to genuinely help, and he, didn't understand the optics. But when they simply just added that paralegal or that intake person to the room that they'd already kind of reported their story to, so that person could kind of fill in the uncomfortable pieces of the story that maybe that not everybody's super comfortable talking about. There's also that too, because like I said, their intake was great, their signups, their show was great, but then they just couldn't convert after that meeting. And it was like, well, why? And it's like, okay, well, if there's sexual harassment cases and you have this dude, maybe that's the issue. Like, and it
And it
turned out
makes
that's what it
sense.
was.
Because I mean,
So,
how many times do you see the defendant in that situation? He's going to have a female lawyer that's going to be sticking up for him in the courtroom.
exactly.
Yeah, presentation actually
Well,
matters.
and I mean, and that's a candid conversation that, David and Digger and I have had, of like, you guys want to expand in some of these markets in Louisiana, but like the predominant person in those markets is probably a minority that probably hasn't had a great experience with someone who looks like you. And so how do I teach them that you're not that same person? Like, how do I, and sometimes it's not even a conscious thing that that person's thinking, but then how do I kind of meet them where they are and let them know that, like, I'm using my power for good, ultimately. And though I understand you maybe have not had a great experience with people who look like me, I'm not like them, and here's why, and here's what I can help you with. And so it's, how do you build that rapport to overcome those kind of subconscious or overt barriers? Like, I mean, people to look at David, you wouldn't know he speaks Spanish. Like, and so when we go out in the community and a lot of these areas where it's Spanish speaking parents, they're not great at it, and he can speak to them, they're like shocked and they're so excited because they're like, wow, like normally I don't get to have this type of interaction. I'm here for my kid is translating. And so they were so excited to have, like, someone they could communicate with. And that it's just like small things like that. Or even, I think a lot of times firms will be like, oh yeah, we have a paralegal that speaks Spanish. And it's like, okay, but that's not the same thing. And you also can't put that burden on one person and an organization to try and hold up an entire arm of the business. Like Spanish speaking communities are extremely like they will vet it and like they'll know that you have to come correct or they will be like, oh no, you're placating me. And so it's like, how do you also do these things in an authentic way? Or just stay out of it if it's not your lane. And that's okay too. Like sometimes it's just not for you.
Yeah, yeah. Or hire the person that can do it.
Yeah, or find like, cool, if you want to help this market, then go out into that market and find someone from it who gets it, who understands it, you know, and have like an actual, a stance on that. Rather than it, be this kind of placating thing. And that's where that always, to me, always drives back to authenticity and like putting your time and energy and money into things that you just naturally care about, that the firm already kind of works on and that you think about, because again, if it's something that you already like, you're always going to have ideas about it. You're always going to want to be coming up with different thought processes on it. But if it's something that isn't really kind of out of your comfort zone, you're probably going to struggle with it a little bit. Like you're going to, it's going to be hard for you to kind of reach in there and think of interesting ideas, or you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to work on that today. I don't want to do this, blah, blah, blah. So it's how do you do it and make it, who you are. There's enough for everyone. I always believe that. And so like, maybe we just get the more outdoorsy slash sports related kind of clients. And then that means that the more like movie, books, art clients go to another firm down the street because that's authentically them and that's okay, you know?
100%. What are there any sort of 2025 roadblocks that you all are thinking about or friction that you all may run into for the year that you're trying to pre-plan for? What's sort of the annual plan right now?
I think for me, as far as annual planning, was like trying to seam everything back to like a centralized place. Because when I go back and look at stuff and I'm like looking through sponsorship requests and things like that, and I'm like, well, why did we do that? And they're like, I don't know, it was like cheap. And I'm like, okay, but like it did nothing and you spent money on it. So was it cheap? Like no, you just kind of like thank you for your donation, but it doesn't help you. And not to say that all charity has to help you, but like what you're putting your time and energy and money into should be things that will like yield something. And I think if they tie back to a centralized ethos, because then you can build on it. Because like I'm looking at this and I'm saying, hey, if we tie things back to community, this then informs where we put, our advertising dollars. This changes who we partner with when we are doing NIL deals. This changes, what I will allow the staff internally to if they want to be a mentor or for a big brothers big sisters type thing, like cool, great. Like now should we build out time for everyone in the organization to have time to volunteer every single month? Is that something we could do as a community? Is it something, that we want to like, kids, we do a big thing called Bike It Forward, where like the kids who show up every day on time for testing, they're not absent. They have like good test scores, and then there's like a drawing, and we draw them randomly, and it's a boy and a girl from each grade level. We give them a bike every year. And so, how do you do things that are also thinking about the people at play and tying them all together? And so I just kind of looked at what we had and I was like, okay, cool. These all run as a through line and I can build on these things over here. Those are great, awesome. If somebody else has some other discretionary budget they want to do, that's fine. But like from a marketing thing, like marketing strategy, we need to make sure all of our stuff comes together and it can be built upon. Because then I'm looking at next year, like, do I expand this partnership? Do I look at other ways to support them? And then I look at all of the people I'm giving money to, and I'm like, okay, how can my XYZ, my Litify vendor that's helping us build custom stuff, how do I say, hey, are you guys interested in something like this and you want to help out? Like how do we also make it all like work together with each other? So those are kind of been my big things of just creating cohesion. And then we also have like some big goals for like new markets and this Coliseum and stuff. And so it's also just planning like how do we also look at these things and make sure they work together. So if I'm launching a event venue, can I also make sure I reserve a few tickets for some of these philanthropies and I give those away either as a raffle, or I want the kids that are in our mentee program to actually be able to go and experience these events. Or I want to, I have so many digital billboards that I use that I can change up as constantly as I want. Why don't I go to my, my partner over here and I say, hey, listen, what if we helped promote this event for you through one of our digital billboards? So like, how do I make all of these things like work together? That's really kind of where I'm at, is like, how do I get more out of everything a little bit, but also make sure that they all like strategically meld.